go ahead and get started. I think it's on the hour. Is everybody,
Yeah.
um, I think if everybody's good. Hey, Meera. So we'll go ahead and get started. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, or if you're in the West Coast, I guess nearly good afternoon. Um, we are really excited to present this first webinar, Fundraising in the Muslim Community, Navigating the Challenges Presented by the Coronavirus Pandemic. It's a partnership of the Center on Muslim Philanthropy, the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative, Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and the Community Collaboration Initiative, which is also part of the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative. And just really excited for everybody to sort of be part of this, and hopefully we can sort of have some conversations that'll help us all navigate this unique challenge for our sector. So this is co-sponsored by Intuitive Solutions, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, IUPUI, the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative, and the Center on Philanthropy. And I did want to do a shout out to my friend and mentor, Dr. Patrick Rooney. He's the Executive Associate Dean for Academic Programs, and he's Professor of Economics and Philanthropic Studies. And some of the presentation I'll talk about in my early remarks will be based on Patrick's work. So I'm stealing his research and his materials because he understands economics and he understands economic crisis and disasters and so on. And if many of the articles that I've been sharing through social media have been Patrick. So I just want to, he's not with us today, but I did want to make a shout out to him because he's going to be here through all the things that we're going to talk about. I'm also excited that we have Dr. Angela Seaworth, and each one will introduce themselves separately, but Angela and I did the PhD program together at the Lilly School of Philanthropy, and she is the founding director of the Rice University Center on Philanthropy. Meera Nigaz, who's the executive director of ISPU, which really, if you look, some of this amazing research that we have, ISPU has been part of this, and I think some of their research, is particularly during this crisis, is incredibly important. And then finally, Tayyib Yunus, who is both the president of the Center on Muslim Philanthropy, and he's also president of Intuitive Solutions, which is a consulting firm that works with Muslim nonprofits. So I just want to get right into the presentation, but before I do that, a couple of announcements that I wanted to make. I'll make some initial presentation, then we'll go to the panelists. They'll each make some remarks, and then we'll go into your questions, because ultimately helping the participants with your questions as best as we can is what this is all about. And the way to ask a question, we've got everybody muted with the exception of the panelists, just because we have nearly 300 people registered, but is through the chat box. So if you just post your questions through the chat box, I will read them out and we will answer them. And once we run out of time, we're committed to save the chat feature and then and answer those and then send those out to everybody. So we will have that follow-up afterwards. And I'll do some follow-up announcements after the presentations and conversations. I'll do the last 5 minutes to just talk about some follow-up and stuff. But with that, I'll get started. So if you think about last year, total contributions in the United States through philanthropy was around $427 billion. Now, this doesn't include, and a lot of people ask me this question, this doesn't include government spending. So if your nonprofit organization got a contract from government or got a grant from government, even though government represents the largest funder of nonprofits in the United States, that's not what is included. We're talking particularly in this webinar, we're really focused on philanthropy, which is basically individuals, corporations, bequests, and foundations. And so last year, $427 billion were given away. And as you can see, 68% of that was individuals. Foundations represented 18%. Bequests, which basically is when people pass away in their wills, they've set aside money, represented 9%, and corporations represented 5%. If you think about American Muslims, and we're going to talk a little bit about the American Muslim community, this is from the ISPU data, if you think about it, and I only pushed this slide, and I won't spend too much time on my presentation because I want to get to remarks. But the key thing I wanted to point out is that if you look at this report, and it's available at the ISPU website, if you go to the ISPU website, type in American Muslim Philanthropy, and you'll find this report. You can download it. It's a really good report. Every single one of you should have access to that data, as well as the other stuff that research that ISPU provides. But the main thing is that all the motivations of giving from American Muslims that are reported is all about their values. It's about their religious obligations. It's about them feeling for their desire to make the world a better place. It's very rarely about what you need, or that the organization is in a crisis, or that your organization has a very inspirational speaker. Really, if you look at this list, really it is about people in terms of what they feel and their vision of the world. And this is not just true for Muslims, but I just wanted to sort of point this out, that when it comes to American Muslims, for them, it's very important that they focus on their values and their vision of the world. If you think about how American Muslims give, and there are two lines, the dark blue line and the light blue line. Again, this is from the ISP report as well. The dark blue line is them giving within the Muslim American community or the Muslim nonprofit sector, and the light blue line is giving outside. So of course, the top one is house of worship, 89%, because we don't have any non-Muslim masajids that we know of. So people give to masjids as being 89% give to mosques. But if you look at domestic poverty, while 60% give to issues of domestic poverty, 81% in the Muslim community to Muslim nonprofits. This could be organizations like ICNA Relief or others. 81% give outside of the Muslim community. In education, 60% give to Muslim organizations, 54% give outside. If you think about overseas relief, non-Muslim organizations are further up. And so this is just an idea. And the key point that I wanted to make here is that and beyond the other points that the panelists will make, is that American Muslims are equal opportunity givers. They have values. They have a belief of what they want to do with their money when it comes to philanthropy, and they will give that money within the Muslim community or outside of the Muslim community in order to meet those values and to achieve those goals. And again, this just talks about this one just talks about the American Muslim spending outside of the faith community, and I just wanted to point this out just to make sure that, so if you're a non-Muslim organization, a Muslim organization that isn't affiliated with the Muslim community, you have really high chances of giving of receiving donations from the Muslim community. And if you are a Muslim organization, you should know that there are Muslims will give if you can demonstrate that you can deliver upon donor values and what the donors think are important. The other point that we're going to make is that if you look at this, and this is again from the ISP report, if you look at what this is saying in essence is that only 3% of Muslims give $10,000 or more. The vast majority of Muslim donors give between 100 to 999. And this is largely, and this is very different than any of the other groups. Jewish community gives 10%, Catholics give 7% over 10,000, Protestants give 8%, white evangelicals at 16%, and so on. And the reason why this is, and then just one thing before I tell you the reason, if you think about Muslims, Muslims are less likely than Jews, Christians, and others to give to religious causes. So 42% of Muslims are. And my colleague Rafiq Khadr and I have done some research on this to examine why that is. And a big part of it, I'm not going to give all of it, but the major reason for that is that we're relatively a young community. If you think about it, if you think about the Muslim community, which is at the very top, the biggest chunk is 30 to 49. we have very small groups that are in that 50 to 64 and 65 plus, which generally give more. And research shows as you get older, you get richer, you have more money, and you give a lot more money. So the Muslim community is relatively the youngest. So this has, 10, 20 years from now, our philanthropy numbers are going to, with all things, if everything else stays equal, the Muslim community's giving patterns are going to look very different. The other piece of it is the American Muslims are poorer than any other faith community. And so that's another reason. The fact that we're young also responds to the point where if we're young, we're more likely, we have more people that have less money to give. And research shows that as you have more money over time, you tend to give more. And I present these demographic data just because I think it's going to inform some of the challenges we face that we'll talk about. So with that, the main predictors of charitable giving, and the source is not ISBU, but I like giving credit to ISBU, but I can send a report. We'll correct the source to give you. But the main predictors of charitable giving is the stock market, personal income, and charitable giving. So when the stock market is down, your giving will decline. When stock market increases, giving will increase. The only exception to that is in 2018 when the stock market was up and GDP was up, but giving declined. And we largely believe that's a result of the Tax Reform Act and the way personal deductions and so on. But again, we don't have enough data yet to sort of finally make that determination. So as you know, the stock market has been in decline over the last quarter. And so that means in the short term, that one would think, okay, that means that giving is going to decline. Well, that isn't necessarily the case. If the stock market comes back to life by the third and fourth quarter, end of the year giving may change, right? The next thing is personal income. As you have more money, you tend to give more away. And that's why if you think about the Muslim giving data, Muslims give less to religious causes and give less at the higher amounts. It's because they have less to give. So over time, as you get more money, you'll give more money. And this is one of the challenges that we face, right? Because if you look around us in America, in the United States, businesses are shuttered at this point. So there's a worry that income is going to decline, and the government, as a result of that, has resulted in a $2.2 trillion stimulus, largely to push on this. So currently, there's a prediction, and all these are wild guesses, and I'll share a little bit about that. But these are wild guesses. But if income declines in America, then that would result in giving declining. Now, there's some exceptions to this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. Finally, charitable giving. So those of you that your donors are more likely to give to you. So right now, the natural inclination at this time is, okay, everything is declining. If our donors, and I'm just going to hypothetically, if our donors are going to give us 10, 20, 30% less this year, let's go out and find 10, 20, 30 other donors to make up that money. And that's a good way. Building your base is a smart way to go. But the reality is the people most likely to give to you, again, are people that have given to you in the past. So while you should focus on sort of expanding your base and so on, if you don't steward your existing donors, you're less likely to sort of mitigate some of the challenges we're facing. To think about what that means in terms of annual retention rates, this just shows, and I'm not going to go into these numbers, and we'll share this video to everybody so you can go back and review this video later on. But in essence, retention rates across the United States have been pretty standard, or around 44, 45%. What that means is that if you were an average nonprofit in the United States, if you had 100 donors this year, 45 to 46 donors of those will give again to you next year, whereas 50 to 54, 55 donors will leave and give to someone else. And the retention rates have been interesting in the Muslim community. Tayyib and I work with a number of Muslim nonprofits across the country, and retention rates are all over the place depending on which part of the pyramid that you're in. But this basically shows to you that if this was an average year, um, an average nonprofit was going to lose half their donors anyway. So you had to make those up anyway. Now you can change that. There are nonprofits that have high retention rates because they do a really good job to do they steward their donors. They make sure they focus on their donors, and they make sure that their donors' needs are met through reporting and by showing them sort of that their donations are having a real impact. So if you think about all of this, what does this mean for us today? So the stock market is in decline. We don't know whether that's going to increase or decline. But if the stock market stays the same or continues to decline, what we know that usually spells a decline in giving. The second piece of it is that there's potential for an economic downturn. So if economic downturn happens, an example of this is we could look at the 2008 recession. In the 2008 recession, it was a long recession. It took nearly 2 years to get out of that. Over that recession, there was a 15% decline in giving in the United States. Now we made it up and we exceeded that over time. But over that period of 2 years, we lost 15% of giving declined by 15%. And I'll show you some of those numbers. The final piece is that it's we can look at disaster relief data to see how disaster relief impacts organizations. So for example, think about the tsunami or think about a crisis in terms of an earthquake and so on. But the difference between this and those disasters are that those are short-lived. A tsunami comes and it ends, and then there's an ensuing rebuilding time, similar to earthquakes. In our case, the COVID-19 pandemic this continues, right? And we don't know when that end will come. And during that long period of time, let's say this lasts another 2-3 weeks, that means there are people for the next 2 to 3 weeks that will need groceries, will need to pay their bills and so on, that may not have jobs to do so, right? So so this period is not short, it may be a long period of time. And then when it ends, it's not just impacting a few. A tsunami only impacted certain parts of the world. The pandemic is global. But it's a really interesting place to look for ways and lessons for the future. This just shows what I was talking about earlier, which is that if you look at, this is giving in the United States. And in 2008, down to 2010, there's a 15% decline, but over time it went up. And the only time that we've had a decline in giving was in 2018, because what we believe is the Tax Reform Act and the way the charitable deductions have occurred, right? And so that just shows that decline right there. So when we think about strategies and techniques, and I specifically want to talk a little bit about the broader techniques, but also in the Muslim community. In the Muslim community, we're highly reliant on special events like the fundraising dinner, where congregational giving, so money that comes in during Friday prayers or our regular prayers, or basically us raising money in sermon-based events, right? But if you look at the ladders of effectiveness, the top ways to raise money are through face-to-face. Ideally, you have a staff member and a board member, or a staff member and a donor. If not, then it's a person. Then it's a personalized letter rather than a mail campaign, right? Then it's personal phone calls, right? And of these three, the face-to-face potentially is tougher right now, unless you do Zoom or something like that. But a personalized letter or a telephone is possible, right? Even in these strategies. And these are the top ways to raise money in terms of giving. If you think about where fundraising events go, it's right at the bottom. Look at the third from the bottom. So all the ones on the first page, then the personalized letter, the internet, an email, a phone-a-thon, direct mail, an impersonal letter, then an impersonal telephone, right? And then comes the fundraising. So the way we've been traditionally raising money, which is difficult to raise in that format in the current environment, is actually not a great way to raise money anyway. Um, and I see questions are coming in, and towards the end, once we have the panelists, I'll make sure that I go through and ask all those questions, answer those questions. So we're going to talk a little bit. You'll hear the panelists talk about the donor pyramid, and this is what it looks like. And in essence, what it means is your major gifts are donors that are top 10% of your donors are considered to be major gifts, and traditionally 10% of your donors should give 60% of your donations. Now, I know in the Muslim community, in nonprofits we worked with, the numbers are different. The bottom is 70%, which is the base, and then you have the middle, which is upgraded. Donors that used to give you the year before, they're coming back and giving to you again, and but they're giving you more. And I'm going to go a little bit faster because I'm taking a lot longer than I should. But when we think about that, at the top of the base, you're trying to have much more personalized contact. And at the bottom of the base is where you do things like launch good or digital marketing campaigns or those kinds of things. Personal contacts and personalized letters are really in the middle. And so with that, this is just to sort of just make a plug. Some of the stuff that we looked at and I looked at was myself and Dr. Sabit Khan at Cal Lutheran looked at whether or not how do Muslim nonprofits navigate challenges? And we looked at two specific challenges. We looked at the 9/11 crisis, and then we looked at 2008 Great Recession. And we looked at Islamic schools as case studies to see whether or not the way they interacted was different or similar, and how did they survive both of those kinds of challenges. And so some of the conversations we're having today are focused on that. So with that, these are just some quick strategies that I wanted to point out before I throw it out to the panelists, which is, the one thing I would say is don't get distracted. Your mission is still relevant. Racism still exists. Islamophobia still exists. People still are hungry. People need data, and people need analysis of that data to inform our decisions. People need places of worship. And I could go on, right? So make sure that you realize that you don't get distracted. Right now, people may come to you and say, you know what, I want to help so-and-so who's poor and give money for COVID-19. If that's not your core mission, you're better off saying, you know what, I know another organization that does that really well. Why don't you give that money to them? That's not giving away a donor, but it's creating that relationship between you and a donor that assures them that you are focused on their mission, on your mission. And when they need you beyond your mission, you can guide them. So it's that relationship you're building. Also look at, this is a time to make sure you have a fundraising plan, you have a gift range chart, to make sure you've examined your donor data. You reached out to your donors and made sure they're okay. The first thing I did when I realized that all this was happening was I reached out to my parents, I reached out to my siblings, and I reached out to my friends. Donors are our friends. And we should be, before we're worried about whether they're going to give us money or not, we should be thinking about whether or not they are okay. And they should feel that's the kind of relationship. Think about who are your champions and who can reach out to your donors. Remind your stakeholders why they started giving you in the first place. Have a strategy for each part of your donor pyramid. Proactively think of ways in which you can do with more with less. And that's the big example of the 2018 crisis. Those nonprofit organizations that were able to trim fat, sort of do more with less, were able to survive. And in that essence, cash flow reserves are incredibly important. And finally, innovation was really important in the 2008 recession. Islamic schools looked at government. So they looked at voucher programs, they looked at accreditation, they looked at those kinds of things. They looked at emergency funds. And they thought of different ways of pushing furthering their mission. So, and right now, and we're going to actually, I'll talk about this at the end, we're going to actually have a webinar on the stimulus and how it can help Muslim nonprofits in a couple of weeks. But look at all of those things. So with that, I've taken a lot more than I should have. I'm going to open it up to our panelists. And so the way we'll do this is we'll have Angela, then Meera, and then Tayeb each take a few minutes, as long as they need, because I took longer than I should have. And they will sort of give their perspectives, and then we'll open it up to everybody. And we have enough time, I believe, to get through this conversation and sort of further this. So with that, I'm gonna be quiet, and I'm gonna hand it over to my friend Angela.
Thanks so much, Shark. It's really a delight to be with all of you today. Sadly, not the circumstances we'd like, but at least we're having good, thoughtful conversations about helping serve more people. My background really has been in fundraising. I decided to make that a functional expertise about 25 years ago, knowing that I wanted to work in the nonprofit world, and I'm grateful that I was able to do that. And aside from that, I work in governance, so we'll hopefully share a couple of different perspectives around that for you. Did go to the PhD program with Shark. It was lovely, but I have an MBA from the University of Chicago and also a graduate certificate in nonprofit management from Indiana University's School of Public and Environmental Affairs. So I say that to let you know I come from a few different perspectives. I like to think of myself very much as a pragmatic and using the best practices of both what we learn from business and nonprofits and applying that to make sure that we can really run our organizations well and serve people as we need to, particularly in these times of need. But always remembering that there's an underlying foundation of humanity in any of these types of decisions. And I think that's where the PhD program comes into place. One thing I'd like to start with is that we really should look to history when we think about what's going on right now, because there are some parallels, and some of the most amazing things that have developed in the nonprofit world came out of crisis. So I had the privilege, I may give Shark a bad memory here, but we had our history doctoral seminar. I see him nodding. It was hard. It taught me I loved history. I didn't know that. But what I chose to research was what women did in World War I, beyond nursing, because we were allowed to do that. But what else did we do? And we created the USO. They were doing nonprofit leadership training for women in other countries to create nonprofits. I mean, it was phenomenal. So that's what I'm eager to see come out of this current situation. What are we doing? We had the kitchen pledges there at that point in magazines, but one of the most famous things that women were supposed to do was knit socks to try and help the war effort. But what are we doing now? We're sewing masks, right? And Joanne Fabrics and fabric stores are sending mask packets. You know, you can pick them up at the door and sew them, and then they'll deliver them to the hospital. So I encourage you to look for that when things are frustrating, and they are going to be challenging for us, particularly in fundraising for the next few years. And I'd like to say few months more so. But over time, I think if we can look for the beauty of philanthropy that we see, little things like 8-year-olds helping make masks, that we'll find a lot of hope in what we're doing. From a fundraising perspective, I have a few tips that I've have been thinking about to share. One is never make a decision for your donor. And one of my mentors told me that early on in my career, and it took a moment to settle in. One, we don't know what someone's personal situation is, so we can't make a decision as to how much they could give necessarily. Of course, we have some data analytics to help, but never make a decision for the donor. Instead, respect them and respect their values, because even if someone doesn't have a lot to give, but they care deeply about what you're doing, they will find a way to help. So that's one of the first things. And Shark already touched a bit on this, but if your mission was worthwhile 3 weeks ago, it still is now. So don't quit talking to your donors, right? Your mission is still relevant. It may not be a first level response. And I think we should all be very honest about that with our organizations. And I don't mean to pick on the opera, but I'm going to at this point. You know, now if it's between making sure someone has shelter and food versus going to the opera, we're going to take care of shelter and food. Basic necessities will come first. And we see this historically through giving data over the last 40 years. But it doesn't mean that the arts aren't helping us get through every day with online tours of museums and Broadway being posted online for free and things like that. So I think we have to try and think about where our organization fits in the community's nonprofit sort of social structure. Is it a first tier or a second tier need? But still, what you're doing is worthwhile to the community, or you wouldn't have been doing it. Now's the time to check in with your donors and over communicate with them. You want to make sure that you're reaching out to them. Is there any way you can serve them? Do they have ideas for your organization? What do they need? Those types of things. The other thing is, and also this is a beautiful time for stewardship, is just to thank them for your support and to say, and to be very candid and say that this is where we are in our recovery situation or in our response to the community. But we will keep you in touch as we figure things out and as things unfold. I think donors love that transparency, to say that you're aware of the community needs, you know where you fit in the community response, and you want them to stay by your side, and we'll let them know when you need them. Some other things you can do now is to try and train your volunteers to help provide support or to try and reach out to other of your donors. And that includes board members as well as other volunteers that you would train, and even your staff. They should have some talking points, particularly those that haven't been through as many challenging situations, perhaps your newer employees that haven't weathered downturns with your organization before. Make sure that you're providing the leadership for them to be able to speak to the donors and volunteers confidently about where you are in your organization. The other thing is, this is a really great time to pick up the phone and call somebody, right? If we can't do these visits, if we could at least call them and talk with them. The other thing that you can do is to reach out digitally. And I have had a working relationship with an organization. It's called Give by Cell. They also market as Engage by Cell. But what they have is a text platform. And Shark is going to share this information with you, but they have a couple of different options for you to try and reach out. Because our data right now is saying that 97% of texts are responded to, as opposed to a good response rate or open rate of 23% for emails. So don't think of it as out of the blue, I'm texting you for money. Yes, you could do that, but this is a platform that you could also send a video from your executive director to try and reach people. That you could do that, or you could just send an update. This, we're thinking of all of our donors, or if it's an after-school program, we miss our kids. We can't wait to be back with you. Tell them we said hello. And when it's time, and hopefully it will only be a few weeks from now, then we can reassess, and we could actually then you could use that for a solicitation. So they have a couple of solutions. One of those being a two-way text message platform, and then the other is mobile fundraising. But what they're doing right now is they're able to give you 50% off the cost of it, and they're doing a 30-day money-back guarantee. So that's what they're trying to do, and I have a code for that because I told them I was going to be speaking with you. So we have an email and a code. It's Angela50 to be able to get that discount, because what they've done is they've reduced their prices dramatically, but they're trying to do this because they know so many small nonprofits are having a hard time reaching their donors. So how can we get to them outside of a lost email? Just a couple more things that I've really been thinking about. Make sure that you're very clear in these talking points and messages, whether it's a digital solution, text, social media, or calls, to make sure that the constituents understand how you're adjusting your program to serve people. If you can do that, can you take your program online shortly, for a short time period? What are your plans moving forward? And again, feel free to be transparent and say that that unfolds, we'll share with you. But as far as who do you begin talking with among all of your donor base, talk to your most loyal donors first. So sure, some people think we have to call our major donors, but the other thing that you can do, and I recommend highly, is look at your data and look at those donors who have given to you 5 or more years, regardless of the giving amount. It could be $25 a year, but they never miss. reach out to those folks, because they're the ones that we also know are good plain giving prospects. That's why we know this loyalty piece matters, because we see that happening. At the end, the legacy gift goes to the organization they've supported their entire life. So make sure and reach out to them in your first wave of folks to say, let's talk with those people who give to us most frequently. The other thing is, as you talk with your donors about what you need in order to keep serving people, one thing I try and always tell my students and remind them is that people aren't persuaded to give because your organization has needs. Matter of fact, that's not motivating at all, right? So think about describing the needs of your organization in terms of what you need to keep serving others. So I thought about this as an example to say that, there's a difference between saying, please give now, once we're ready to make the ask, please give now so we can continue to provide after school programming when we're all back to work. We really miss our kids. That versus please give now or we're going to have a reduction in staff. So think about always positioning. Language is really important when we're talking with our donors right now. And the other thing is this time, if we're in a sort of a crisis situation of not being able to pay employees, I personally believe we should invest deeply in human capital. It's hard to find good people to work in the nonprofit sector. When you find people who are talented and really share a passion for your mission, do what you can to keep them, whether that's reduction in time, everyone in the organization taking a pay cut, so we can all stay, keep our insurance, because, heaven knows right now in this particular situation, we all need that. So do what you can to be creative in order to keep those good people. The other thing that might come up through this is some uncomfortable conversations when you talk with donors to say, well, why don't you have a 6-month reserve? We expect you to have a 6-month reserve. If you were prepared, then you shouldn't have this crisis. You shouldn't be asking me and making this call. So I think that we need to be really transparent if we're in a situation where we don't have the reserves, to say we understand and we were working toward that, but we know that this is going to be a long road to recovery, and we're asking for your help to get through the short term service, and then we can continue on our strategy to build up our reserve. So those were my initial thoughts, and when everyone's finished, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I hope that some of that's helpful for you, but I really encourage you to find the deepest part of your optimism and humanity in this situation, so you can continue helping donors feel really good about being a part of your organization. Thanks.
Thanks, Angela. And I'm going to hand it over to Meera to take the next few minutes.
Hi, everyone. I'm sure I know some of you, and many of you I may not. As Sharik mentioned, I'm the executive director of ISPU, also called the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. My background, I've been working in the nonprofit space, mainly in nonprofits, although I did work on the funding side early in my career, but for 25 years. And we've faced many challenges. I've been an executive director outside of the Muslim community, as well as now with ISPU serving Muslim communities. We faced many challenges, or I've faced many challenges in this 25 years, but never really anything like this that is such on a mass scale. So, I, like you, many of you, I'm sure, are nonprofit leaders like myself. There's just a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of uncertainty, and all of us are just trying to make well-informed decisions, which is really what ISPU is all about, right? That's, for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a research and education organization. We do research and education solely about American Muslims in order to support well-informed dialogue and decision-making. So I'm pulling out all of that, as I'm thinking about how to think about fundraising at this time, because this is really exactly where research and data and case studies, the types of things we produce, really come in handy, so that we can understand past behavior and what has happened in the past, and combine that with asking ourselves really good and hard questions, and innovating and anticipating, what might be coming down the line. So I wanted to share with you, Sharik already shared a lot of our data from our American Muslim Philanthropy report, which I know they put in the chat box. So please have a read of that because it really is helpful. I won't rehash the data that he already shared. One thing I just wanted to add though, and obviously the data that he shared that we have looks at Muslim giving in normal times, right? These are not normal times. However, it is very helpful to understand past behavior because, as Sharik said, it's one of the three things that will determine sort of how people behave is their past charitable giving behavior. So one just data point I wanted to add to what he already shared was that Muslims are very philanthropic just generally. One of our reports called the Muslims for American Progress Project found when we did a case study in Michigan that the average Michigan Muslim household spent 18% more on charity in 1 year, which we looked at 2015 specifically, than the average American household nationally. So Muslims are by and large a very philanthropic community. And we saw this again after the 2016 elections on a national level. 1 in 4 Muslims actually increased their donations to organizations associated or serving Muslim communities. And most notably, Muslim women were the ones who increased those donations even further. So those are just a few additional data points we might want to consider when we're thinking about how we as nonprofit leaders deal with this response. What we don't know and what's really hard is we have no idea how people are going to behave moving forward. We don't know how people will behave. We don't know what's going to happen with the stock market. We don't know what else might happen, right? So the questions I'm asking myself are, will Muslims give based on previous patterns, or will this be something totally new? Will people, as we all, I'm sure, are thinking, will people give mostly to immediate need organizations, leaving kind of the rest of us, like my organization, by the wayside? Will high net worth individuals give less because of the stock market? Will low level workers give less because they've lost their jobs? Will mid-level donors who may not be so beholden to the stock market and may not have lost their jobs, will they step into the void? So these are the questions I'm kind of asking myself. When we look at Muslim communities, we know that a lot of Muslims are doctors. In our same Michigan study, 15% of the doctors in the entire state of Michigan are Muslim. And Muslims only make up 3% of the state's population. So they're very overrepresented at the medical level. What will that do to giving? I mean, they're on the front lines, or they're running medical practices that may have had to drastically scale back. So what does that do to giving? And we also know from our data that a sizable number of Muslims are service workers, right? Cab drivers in New York. Don't quote me on this because I'm forgetting the number, but it was a very large percentage of Muslims in New York that we looked at were cab drivers, food cart vendors. What's going to happen to these very at-risk, vulnerable groups at this time, and what will that do to giving? So we just have to do the best that we can. I'll tell you what we're doing at ISPU, and I'm actually very happy to hear about the previous speakers who are experts in fundraising specifically, because I think we are doing a lot of the right things, or at least we're doing a lot of the things that are being recommended. And so there's sort of 3 buckets of things that we're thinking about or doing. One is communications and programming. Like Sharik mentioned, and I think Angela as well, we are staying on mission. We were not set up to address a pandemic. That's not what we were set up to do. So we are trying to figure out how to continue our very important work while also responding to the current need in ways that make sense for us. And so, we have a number of ways that we're probably going to be doing that over the next few weeks or few months. But we really are, every time we think about something, keeping our mission in mind and not going outside of our lane. We're staying within our lane. And we're trying to communicate that consistently to our donors. What are we keeping going? What are we adapting? How are we going to do that? And while we're communicating that consistently, we're also adapting as needed, our messaging and our communications. We're clearly, like many of you, thinking about short-term fundraising. How are we going to make it through the next few months, few years, whatever this ends up being, we did build up some cash reserves, not a lot, but we took that advice a few years ago and worked on building up some months cash reserves. So we have a little bit of leeway, but that doesn't mean we're not in need of short-term fundraising, because we, like Angela mentioned, my prime concern is keeping our amazing staff, our world-class talent. Because when we get out of this, we need them. We need them now, and we need them when we're out of this. So the things we're thinking about with short-term fundraising, we're thinking about our case for support now. We have a case for support generally, but we're adapting that to the now situation. You know, how do we communicate the need for our organization in this particular moment? We're connecting with our individual donors, and we're trying to leverage our board and all of our staff to do that and really connect with people at the human level. We are all just human beings facing a terrible, terrible tragedy right now. And we're trying to connect with people on that genuine level. We're not really focused on engaging new donors. As Sharik mentioned, the people who are more likely to give are people who've been our friends and partners for many, many years. And so we're focusing on them. We're talking to foundations that support us. If any of you have foundation funding, now is the time to talk to those funders and see if they can convert to general operating support, which is something we're talking about. We're obviously, like many of you, switching to online events. It's going to be a very crowded space during Ramadan, the online event area. So I've already seen online calendars for webinars and things, and it's just kind of mind-blowing. So I think we all have to find ways to try to do events online, but it is going to be a very crowded space. And we are working on our Ramadan campaign. Lastly, we are planning. We are thinking, unfortunately, about what happens if we don't hit our mark during Ramadan. You know, we only have a few months cash reserve. So what does that mean? We're going to have to think about that, even though I don't want to. I hope that we never have to use those plans, but we need to start thinking about that. I'm also paying attention to the CARES Act and the stimulus package, and I'm excited to hear a little more from Sharik and other experts about what that is going to look like. And you're going to have to start talking to your boards. Would you take a loan if you have to pay back interest? Would you not do that? You know, you're sort of committing yourself. If the loans won't be forgiven, you're committing yourself to paying that back. So every organization is going to have to think about that. And we are trying to plan for things, thinking about a light at the end of the tunnel. We are, in an abundance of optimism, starting to think about our annual dinner, which usually takes place in November. We are recognizing that that may have to be online, but we need something to look forward to, and for our donors to look forward to some kind of celebration. So we are still planning that, even though it's very uncertain. Final thoughts. A lot of us have worked, you know, of course, I am concerned about my organization and our work, because I know how vital it is and how much impact we have every day. But I'm also really concerned about the ecosystem and all of us working together collectively. A lot of us have worked really hard over decades to build up this ecosystem that serves the needs of Muslim communities. And we can't, as a collective, allow this hard-won ground to be lost. The ecosystem and the organizations that make it up, quite frankly, have to survive and thrive post this crisis, because the needs that we were addressing 3 short weeks ago, when the world seemed less scary, those needs are still going to be there when we come out of this, perhaps even more so. So I'm thinking of this also as an opportunity to push the reset button. How do we strengthen the collective ecosystem so that when we get out of this, we have stronger programs, innovative and adaptive programs, stronger fundraising models, like Sharik said, that don't rely so heavily on events income, and that are much more sustainable in the long run, more diversified fundraising. So I'm looking at that as an opportunity also to push this reset button and strengthen our collaborative efforts and our collective work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Meera. And last but not least, I'll ask Tayyib to make some remarks, and then we'll go into Q&A.
Thank you, Sharik. Thank you everyone for coming out. Actually, I learned so much from Shadik, Angela, and Meera. Thank you guys. So my name is Tayyip Yunus. I'm the founder and CEO of Intuitive Solutions. It's an execution agency that I founded in 2002, and it was purposed to improve the organizational performance by providing talent and capacity for-profits and nonprofit organizations in healthcare. Somewhere around 2015 or 16, I discovered the Lilly School of Philanthropy and met this assistant professor there, Dr. Shadik Siddiqui, and I learned about a bigger problem that he was dreaming about, working on and building a coalition of raising awareness about and trying to solve, which is the capacity problem specific in the nonprofit sector, specifically looking at the American Muslim nonprofit sector, the social good sector, and saying, how can we help these organizations do more with less? That was the first time I ever heard that phrase, is how do we help people who care about making the world a better place do more with less? And my DNA, I'm a social entrepreneur. I look to the future with the lens of what happened in the past, and I'm trying to predict and think and plan about how can I navigate the future. And so he's talking about how can we improve the capacity of American Muslim nonprofits so that these social good heroes and sheroes can do more with less. And that journey took me through learning more about, nonprofit best practices, philanthropy, social entrepreneurship, and ultimately landed me on launching a new division here at Intuitive Solutions, which is focusing on improving execution and helping nonprofits become higher performing nonprofits at Intuitive Social Enterprise Division. So I took some of the best talent from my healthcare company, brought them over to the nonprofit division, and now every day we're working with nonprofits, largely American Muslim nonprofits, and helping them navigate, plan, and implement strategies to succeed. So for me, like when I think about what's happening, and I'll take a page out of the class. I don't know if I can share my screen real quick. Let's see. Will it let me? Won't let me, but that's okay. You might have to give me access there, Shadik. Will it let you?
Let me give it to you. Let me see how to do that. Hold on. The panelists, sorry. And Tayyip, and
That's okay. If not, no big deal.
I'm going to make you co-host, and that should hopefully make it happen. See if that works.
There it is. Okay.
Sorry, I'll do the same for Angela and Meera as well. Sorry. All yours, my friend.
All right. You should see a whiteboard. And I'm going to stop my video and lay my iPad down. And I'm going to do a quick drawing. What we know from the amazing 30-year research that the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy did is that a healthy annual fund for a nonprofit should look something like this. My drawing's kind of funny. That 10% of your donors, and this is what Shadik showed, that 10% of your donors should be contributing at 60% of your cash. If this is cash, this is quantity of donors. And what we know is that 20% of your donors, your funders, supporters, or whatever you call them, should be contributing at 20%. And then the balance, which is 70%, they should be contributing at your cash at the remaining 20%. This is a healthy annual fund when you look at your donor mix. Some of the work that my team and I are doing with American Muslim nonprofits, the majority of these American Muslim nonprofits, unfortunately, my drawing is so bad. It actually looks something like this. 3 to 5% are contributing 60 to 80% is what it looks like. And then you have almost 90% contributing at a smaller percentage. And a very, very, very small mid-level here contributing at the balance. So this is what many of the American Muslim nonprofits are looking like. So let's talk about COVID-19. And I come from a huge healthcare family. I have 8 brothers and sisters. The majority of them are all in healthcare. I was a black sheep. I didn't go into medicine. When I think about COVID-19, I think about how COVID-19 is a virus that we as individuals are facing. And the prescription for that is, we all know, we need to be good citizens. We need to be good neighbors. And that means we need to practice social distancing. But COVID-19 is not the virus that your nonprofit is facing. COVID-19 is not the virus that your nonprofit is facing. What your nonprofit is facing is the collapse of income. And as a strategist, you have to think about what is the impact or the symptoms of the collapse of income. If we say COVID-19, the symptoms for an individual who's infected by COVID-19, the symptoms will be trouble breathing, fever, all those things, right? So if the collapse of income is the virus that's going to infect our nonprofits, then what are those symptoms, right? So some of those symptoms are what we know and what we see already is folks who were part-time workers, who were retail workers, folks who were independent contractors. These folks now are largely unemployed because those shops are either forced to be closed or those shops could no longer afford them. And when we look at the donor mix, the majority of these folks will probably make up the base of your donors. So there's this symptom you should expect to plan for at the base of your donors. So if 90% of your donors are in this demographic, you should expect to see some symptoms very soon. Now, let's talk about the American Muslim community. Most of our nonprofits that we work with, at the top of the base, there are the doctors, as Meera just highlighted, 15% of the physicians in Michigan, and also the donors, the physicians are giving. And then you also have the self-employed or the business owners. So if you're a doctor and these doctors are making up the top of your pyramid, these doctors right now, they're not seeing patients. And the doctors who were generating the most revenue are your plastic surgeons, your ENT surgeons. My brother's an ENT surgeon. I have another brother-in-law who's a GI surgeon. These specialists, the bulk of their revenue was from non-critical surgeries, and the non-critical surgeries are being canceled by the hospital systems and the surgery centers. So these high revenue generating providers, physicians are no longer, their cash flow is impacted. And then the other ones that might be self-employed, some of the first things that you should expect to see a self-employed or business owner do when they're affected with cash flow, if they're philanthropic, they're going to stop their own paycheck. That's the first thing they're going to do. My buddies, my colleagues who are also business owners, when I talk to them, the ones that are philanthropic, the first thing they say is, I'm just going to stop my paycheck before I do layoffs. The other guys who are not so philanthropic, they're saying, I'm keeping my paycheck, but I'm going to lay people off. So the philanthropic business owners, they're going to stop their own paychecks. When they stop their own paychecks, that affects their cash flow. So without taking this on too long, you could continue your own analysis, but expect this to affect the top of your pyramid. Now, let's talk about the middle of the pyramid. These folks, they might still be employed. They might still be employed by large corporations. They have salaries. If they're still philanthropic, you should expect them to still give. I highlight this not to say these are rules. I'm walking you through this journey because you need to go through this journey. You need to perform recency, frequency, monetary analysis on your donor database. That's your first step. Next 24 to 48 hours, if you haven't done it already, you need to do an RFM analysis. The next 72 hours, you look at your donor data and try your best to do a demographic analysis and a geographic analysis. Where are my donors? Who are my donors? Who are my supporters? I'm going to give you one big fat don't. This is a big fat don't. What you should not do is go to the top of your pyramid and tell these doctors and tell these small business owners and entrepreneurs that you need cash now to support your organization, because they too are experiencing the same thing. You're going to upset them and you're going to run them off. In this week, just yesterday, I had a major donor, and some of the research that we've been doing shows that major donors give to up to 9 organizations. These donors are who, if you're calling them right now and saying, brother or sister so-and-so, please support us. We won't be able to do our banquet this year. We need to be able to cover our salaries and payrolls. Can you please pay? As Angela said, as Shadik said, as Meera said, you need to build you need to make a genuine human connection. Revisit your relationships with your donors. And this will be the biggest do that I lay out in front of you as I stop. Take a human approach to reach all of your donors in your segments. I don't know how to clear my whole board, by the way. Let's see if I hit delete. Clear my drawing. There it is. Okay. Take all your donors, for example, and lay them across a spreadsheet, right? And what will happen is you'll have a row for every donor, for example. And then take and segment it like we talked about. Take all the donors at the top and assign these to your board. And don't just expect your board to go out and start having conversations. Give them a communication plan. In that communication plan, I want you to have 4 touch points. The first touch point is you're going to tell your board members, I don't want you to ask for money. I just want you to ask the donor, how are they doing? Are they doing okay through COVID? The second touch point is going to basically be to reconnect them to the mission, to thank them, to say, hey, if it wasn't for all the years of support that you gave us, we actually wouldn't have even made it this far likely. So thank you. Third touch point is bring them your plan. You know why? Because a plan tells them that you're doing your due diligence and they're not just winging it, and that you're not just panicking in a scary environment. A plan tells them that you're being thoughtful, that you're being intentional, that you're being strategic. Number 4, now you make the ask, but your ask is recrafted to basically say, here's the plan. How much of this do you think you could comfortably support while sustaining your own enterprises? And what I love to do is to show them a gift range chart. In my gift range chart, I can show them at what level they see themselves on the team of all the donors of the organization. Folks, there wasn't much more I could add better than my colleagues who came before me. So what I aimed to do was to share some prescriptions and some lessons, that action items that you need to do next. And that is, number 1, go back to your database and RFM your database. Number 2, take all your donors, as Angela said, 5 years back or more, and find those folks who've been supporting your organizations and build tighter relationships with them. Think about total available human capacity. Take all your donors, break it down into portfolios, assign them to total available human capacity, including your board, give them communication guides and communication scripts, and get closer with your donors. And inshallah, the outcome is already written by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our job is only to make high quality decisions, well-informed decisions. That's the expectation Allah has with us. And number two, that we should execute on our plan with ihsan, with excellence, and then we'll get through this. I'll stop there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Tayyib. And I think now we have around 25 minutes. So we'll take the next 20 minutes to answer questions, and then I'll do 5 minutes of closing. And I'll open up, let me just quickly share my screen so we're back on track on that. But thank you again. One thing I was going to share, I had a conversation with a friend of mine that is vice president for one of the largest donor advised funds in the world. So this is the largest collection of donor advised funds. Because we're about to actually do a training on donor advised funds, I'll share that at the end. But one of the interesting things is that in the last week alone, $1.5 billion have been given from donor advised funds out to charity. Because donor advised funds cannot be used for anything. They can't be used for business. They can't be used for personal income. Donor advised funds were in the past given to a fund, and basically it sits there. And the only thing that people can use it for is charity, is for your cause. So your donors that want to give zakat, want to give donations, but don't have personal income, don't have other sources of income, if they have donor advised funds, this is a time that you can engage and they can give to you. So even within the doom and gloom, there are sources. And the fact that in the last week alone, $1.5 billion, think about that full amount, $427 billion given last year, last week, $1.5 billion. So look at your past databases. Tayyib mentioned Meera and Angela. Look at if you got a check from Fidelity, from Schwab, from the American Muslim Community Foundation, and these community foundations. Those people have donor advised funds, have a strategy for them. So with that, I'm going to stop because I'm again taking more time than I should. But I just thought that tidbit just came through from my friend who was saying, that's something that I thought was interesting. So I'm going to go through these questions and feel free to answer. Whoever wants to amongst the panelists can take them on. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to, it's a long list. Thank you. You guys have been very active. Here we go. Sorry. Okay, so the first question is on what is the total American Muslim giving in the US? Where does this giving go to? I was always under the assumption that majority of it goes to religious institutions or leaves the country. Do you have stats that show how much of giving stays in the country to solve local problems? And I'll let Meera answer this, but what I will say is we really don't have the answers to that. That's why I think I'm on the board of ISBU, so I'm going to do my bit and say support our ISBU because they will get you these answers. But what the American Muslim Philanthropy Report says, and Meera, tell me if you think my analysis is incorrect, is the majority of money actually stays in the United States. Very little actually leaves the country. Majority of it stays in the country. It goes to mosques for sure. But domestic poverty is another big place that it goes to, and civil rights and so on. The amount of money that actually leaves the country is very small. It just looks really large. So I've done some research that looks at all these relief organizations, and when you aggregate all their cash giving, and if you were to just look at one state like California and look at all the amounts of money given to the mosques there, the mosque giving alone exceeds that. So it looks big because there's a few organizations that are aggregating this money, whereas the larger nonprofit sector that serves American Muslims broadly is larger. There's probably around 100 relief organizations, but there are over 7,000 nonprofits that serve the Muslim community in the United States. So that's my perspective. But Meera, I'll ask you to give your perspective.
Yeah, no, Sharik, that's what our data basically shows. Two points to that. One is that Muslims are pretty much as likely to give domestically as they are overseas, and they're not mutually exclusive, right? So just over 50% of Muslims said they contributed to an overseas cause in the year that we did the study. And just over 50% said they were donating to domestic poverty causes, plus civil rights and all these other things. So it actually, while some money goes overseas, it's not, I think, what people imagine it. And just to give you some perspective on that, when we look across faith groups, because all of our studies look, all of this polling looks across faith groups, Muslims are actually as likely as other faith groups to spend on overseas relief efforts. So there's not really a difference. So just to give you an example, 54% of Muslims in the year we studied gave to overseas relief efforts. 52% of Jews did the same, 52% of Catholics, 48% of Protestants. So, it's not, Muslims are not different in that respect.
Great. Thank you. The next question is if we could talk a little bit about the stimulus package. That's a great question. We won't answer that today, largely because we have another full hour that we're doing just on that. And to be honest, it just got past Friday. And it's not enough information. Anything we'll give you is stuff that you already know. But we're working with ISPU, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, Engage, and I'm also reaching out to Independent Sector National Council of Nonprofits to come in and give you something. So we won't do that today, but I just wanted to give a shout out that we do recognize that it's there. You should look at it, and so on. I'm just going to go through just for time. Can you talk a little about donor burnout, different local organizations targeting the same individuals repeatedly? And any one of you guys can take that on.
I don't know that I have an answer for that, except that it's a problem even in the best of times, right? I mean, it's just, we know that that's a problem long before this pandemic started. And I think, I don't know. I mean, off the top of my head, I think that's why it's so important to have really genuine relationships with our donors, because they're our partners in this work, right? And they're gonna partner with the organizations that align the most with their philanthropic goals. We can't, people are gonna pick and donate to things that really align with what they want to accomplish in the world. And we're just the vehicle for that to happen. And that's why those relationships are really, really important. And I don't know, the burnout part, it's just, it's going to keep happening, and it's going to be even worse now because there's so much need, and people are so, people are just stressed about this. So I don't really have an answer, except that it comes back to really building partnerships with our friends and donors.
Anybody else?
Sure. When I talk with folks about donor fatigue, I try and have us frame it from the perspective of even a friendship, right? Your best friend can call you 12 times a day and you don't care. Mm. But when you hear from somebody out of the blue and they're asking you for something, that's different, right? It's a little bit of a stretch, but you know what I'm saying. If your organization is staying in touch with donors in between asks and developing a true relationship with them, it's going to feel like their best friend calling, right? That's what we try and strive to, or at least aspire to, because if you're only, there's some really good research by Penelope Burke around stewardship, and it's saying that 96% of the respondents in her survey said that the only time they heard from the nonprofits was when they were asking for money. So what you want to do, in my opinion, to decrease donor fatigue is actually to increase communication with the donor. You only ask them to give once a year unless we're in some sort of crisis mode, but instead you're sending them really positive updates. This is what we were able to do with your gift, or we had a great client story. So they look forward to hearing from you. When you do have to ask, then it's natural.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next question, I'm just going to keep going down the list. Sorry. Are there any good online fundraising platforms that you guys would recommend? And I'll just throw one in. If you're looking at a crowdfunding campaign, crowdfunding mechanism, as you know, in the Muslim community, we have Launch Good, but I'm sure the others would have others. But if you're thinking about a crowdfunding, that's one. But I'll open it up to the others to also have some suggestions.
At ISPU, yeah, we've used LaunchGood before. We've also used a sort of broader platform. LaunchGood is really specifically mainly for Muslim organizations and Muslim communities. We've also used Global Giving, which is just a much broader platform for crowdfunding. Zakatify is something you might want to look at as well. We're also on Zakatify. We've also tried peer-to-peer platforms. That's a different thing than crowdfunding, but peer-to-peer platforms, we've used CauseVox in the past, and that allowed us to harness the power of our volunteers and friends who wanted to raise money for ISPU, and they were able to create their own pages and raise money alongside us for, campaign purposes. Those are the main ones that I can think of that we've tried in the past. I will say, sorry, just quickly on that though, crowdfunding platforms are fantastic because they give you a platform, but they are only as good as your networks, right? You have to communicate with your donors and then drive them to a place like LaunchGood, and they'll donate. Some people may just come across your nonprofit on a website like LaunchGood or Global Giving, but the vast majority of people who are probably going to give are going to be people that are in your network already that you're driving to that platform. So I just want to point that out because I think a lot of people think that crowdfunding, you just kind of put something up there and then you build it and people will come, and that's not how that works.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I would say as a practical sort of roadmap is start with your pyramid, and you want to know where you need campaigns. I remember one day I was learning from my mentor Shadiq Siddiqui in a class, and he said if the base is too light, the prescription is grow the base. And then what are those things you need to do to grow the base? If your mid is too light, what are those prescriptions to grow it? If the top of the pyramid is too light, what are the prescriptions to grow it? So largely online campaigns, as Meera said, and Shadiq had mentioned, it's about growing your base and building your base. Ultimately, what you want to do is you want someone to come in through the base, and then you want to upgrade them by stewarding them and cultivating and nourishing that relationship over a long period of time. If someone gives 3 times, the times they're going to give you for over 10 years, it means you're doing something right at some point. So the other thing on the digital platform, I'd also say is know who you're trying to reach. One of the best tools that I learned when I took these courses was something called constituency mapping. It's a constituency exercise. This constituency, whenever we think, oh, I need to grow the organization, I need to find donors, our mind immediately goes to, let's just throw everything we can online. It doesn't work that way. For-profit corporations don't do it. Nonprofits shouldn't do it either. You really want to be intentional in terms of what problem you're solving on your annual fund. That's where you start. And once you know what problem you're solving on your annual fund, then you want to know who your donors are and where they are. Now, very specifically, I agree with Meera 1,000,000%. Don't think of these crowdfunding platforms as they're magically going to bring you donors. You just put your sign up like it's on the side of a busy highway, in Chicago on the side of 294. I used to live in Chicago 15 years. That you're going to have, 250 cars drive by every day, see your sign, and all of a sudden 250,000 drivers are your donors. Doesn't work that way, right? So, but these platforms are technology that help you. For example, one of the things that I like about LaunchGood is now you have the ability to set up a community page. And that community page allows you, we can talk about this again another time, but allows you to put your influencers and your ambassadors as having sub-campaigns. And then you're communicating through their networks to convert donors, base donors, into your donor database. principally speaking, I am actually deploying LaunchGood community campaign pages for every nonprofit that I work with right now, aggressively. Then when you're talking about Facebook, you're talking about these other social media platforms. The other day, my son, he goes to NYU, and I said, hey, so what do you guys use nowadays? And he said, we don't use Facebook. That's for 40 and 50-year-old people like you, Dad. None of us are on Facebook, right? They're using other social. So, but is he the target audience for my nonprofit? Maybe, maybe not, right? So you have to answer those questions. You need to know, who is my donor? What prescription do I need to right size my annual fund? Then create the strategies that I need. My sister, for example, she's all day long on Facebook. So if we want to attract my sister, then we need to have a really good Facebook campaign, perhaps even an ad campaign. I don't know. But start with where's my pyramid not right sized? Find your prescriptions for your donor database. Then constituency map, where do I find these people in my universe? Then campaigns to reach these networks and bring them into our donor universe at a high level framework.
Great. Thank you. So we have around 4 more minutes. So I'm going to ask one question that I think I've been looking, there are many questions. And the one thing I will say is, all the questions you have, I'm saving them. And we will, even the ones that we don't get in this time, we'll type up the answers, and everyone will get an email with all the questions with the responses. So you'll have that for sure, the ones that we're not able to answer today just because of time. I did want to ask one question that keeps coming up again and again and again, which is, Meera, specifically to you, and to you, Tayyib. Meera, you're at ISPU, you're thinking about Ramadan, it's 3 weeks from now. Tayyib, your clients are thinking about Ramadan 3 weeks from now. What are some strategies that you guys are thinking about now in order to sort of deploy this Ramadan? Because the Ramadan this year will be different. So I think a lot of people are asking about Ramadan and those campaigns. So if you guys could share some of that, and then, and I'm going to have a question for Angela on a different topic that'll come up right after that.
At ISPU, we're actually deploying a lot of the same tools that we always use during Ramadan. So ISPU doesn't rely heavily on events during Ramadan. In fact, we've never done events during Ramadan. All of our Ramadan fundraising has always been virtual, and a comprehensive, to Tayyib's point, it's always been a very comprehensive plan to reach all of the different segments of our donor list. So it includes, a written appeal, an online platform, an email campaign. It combines a lot of different elements that we've already been talking about. What is different this year? The thing we're thinking of differently are 2 things. One is we're probably going to try a much more diversified. We're going to add even more elements this year because we just want to make sure that we're sort of engaging all of our constituents and not missing anybody out. So we may do a little more than we usually would, like add another online platform or something like that. But the main thing that we're thinking of differently this year is our messaging. That is really what we're trying to think through, right? Because the messaging this year, these are just not normal times. Our normal way of communicating our work and our impact, we're having to think about how to do that sensitive to the moment that we're living in. So I would just say that we're planning on doing all the things we usually do. We're just planning on how to do that with sensitivity and understanding of the moment that we're all sharing.
For me, if I am a nonprofit that has in the past largely deployed an event-based strategy through Ramadan, here's what I would do. And this is what I'm doing for my nonprofit is basically, so for example, there's a nonprofit we're working with, they do 2 events a week. And they've always done these 2 events a week. And they always did these 2 events a week. Sometimes it's a living room fundraiser. Sometimes it's in the back of a restaurant. It's an iftar party. And sometimes it's been this banquet, this big banquet. So I'm just giving you my playbook for what it's worth. Okay. Again, I'm going through this just like you guys are. So what we did is we took every event, right? About 8 events. And we said, how much did we raise last year at these events? Right? So event A was 10,000, event B was 100,000, event C was 50,000, event D was 35,000. And then we said, let's take that number and build a gift range chart. And so from those goals of what we want to raise at these events this Ramadan, we created a gift range chart. Step 3, we went into the database. Who gave last year? How much did they give? And we lined those donors up to those amounts on the gift range chart. And guess what? We now have a strategy to meet that goal without an event, without writing a check to a banquet. If anything, if I'm the banquet guys, I'm really sad, right? I'm not sad if I'm a nonprofit right now. I'm actually really happy that I don't have to write big checks to a banquet. Next is, okay, Brother Tayyib, that's great. You know who you need to raise how much from to hit your goal. That's true. I just described you a playbook on how to do that. Next is the communication plan, right? Same playbook. First touch point is, hey, how are you doing? I hope you and your family are doing well. Second touch point, thank you for supporting us last year at that banquet, because we wouldn't have made it this far without you. Third touch point, hey, you know what? We're not having that banquet this year. Here's our plan on how we're going to achieve that number in the absence of the banquet. What do you think? Fourth touch point, do you see yourself giving at that same level as you did last year? What's comfortable for you? Fifth touch point, can you include us in your Ramadan giving this year at that touch point? Next touch point, thank you so much. Now you're in Ramadan, you're making the ask. After Ramadan, you're doing the stewardship. That's at a very, very high level, sparing you all the details in time. That's the playbook.
Sorry, I was muted. And I was also answering some of the questions by typing in. So my last question, and then we'll go into closing, which is, Angela, one question that a lot of people are asking is, can you think about fundraising management softwares that you've used that would be useful, specifically for smaller nonprofits?
Absolutely. One of the easiest and most flexible is Donor Perfect. And one reason I mention that is because it's actually it's priced on number of records. So if you're a small nonprofit, it's very affordable. Even at the highest level enterprise, it's $750 a month, but that's for people that have thousands and thousands of records, like over 100,000. So I've heard Apricot, Razor's Edge. If you don't have a database right now, Razor's Edge is very expensive. Let's be very honest about that. They're sort of considered an industry leader, but they are expensive. You can look to see if they have lower end. But right now, Donor Perfect, Apricot, and then there's something I believe called Little Green Light. Those are some of the ones that I'm aware of that nonprofits are using. And I don't recommend doing the free Salesforce one. And the reason I don't is because you have to have somebody that knows Salesforce, which we could find or outsource, but you also have to know somebody that can build the system to work for you. And it could be a lot more expensive down the road. It's lovely that they offer this free to nonprofits, but you're going to have so much time building it as opposed to getting an out-of-the-box solution that comes with training. So those are my recommendations.
Great. And I'll share some more. I think Muhi Khwaja from American Muslim Community Foundation has also shared some unchapped features. I agree with Angela, by the way. I don't recommend Salesforce. And Boomerang is another one I would recommend. But I just wanted to quickly thank the panelists, and I just wanted to let you know, you will, most of the questions that we answered, the ones we haven't We're going to work on sending you guys those in writing later on. There is going to be a bunch of follow-ups that I wanted to just quickly share. We're going to do an evaluation. So you're going to tell us what we did well, what we didn't well. We've got 4 or 5 other webinars to go on. A lot of you have asked questions about the recordings. This whole video was recorded. We're going to make it available through the Center on Muslim Philanthropy's e-library. We'll send instructions on that later on. A lot of you asked 2 questions. One, how will Muslim giving be impacted because of COVID-19? So just FYI, next week, we'll be fielding a survey that reaches out to Muslim donors and asks them that question. And we'll be asking you to amplify that to your donors. So a link will go out, you'll all receive it. If you can share that with all your donors, they can reach out. And our hope is to get the initial raw findings out to you before Ramadan. So we'll actually send some raw findings so that your Ramadan campaign, because we're specifically going to ask some research questions about Ramadan. And we are doing this at IU and at the Center on Muslim Philanthropy, so that we can sort of be we're trying to get this research finding. The other piece of it is you'll receive a survey next week on how you are impacted by COVID-19, because we want to reach out to government, we want to reach out to Independent Center and National Council of Nonprofits and advocate on your behalf. And the best way we can do that is through data. So if you could respond to that survey. Again, I want to thank the panelists and the attendees. Just some reminder, you'll receive these later on, but we are going to do a 1-hour workshop on stewarding donors during Corona pandemic. A lot of the questions are around how do we avoid donor burnout? How do we worry about donor fatigue? How do we engage with donors during this time? How do we not overdo it? We're going to talk about that on Friday, April 3rd. You'll see this information. People asked about donor advised funds in the questions. We're actually going to do one on donor advised funds, fundraising, and the pandemic. We're going to specifically give you strategies, and we'll share that data to you. People have asked about the stimulus, the CARES Act, and the Muslim nonprofit sector. We're going to analyze this. We're bringing a bunch of experts together, but ISPU, Muslim Public Affairs Fund, and some of them that are part of the Community Collaboration Initiative. There's a think tank of public policy people that are going to be, we're going to bring them together, including some experts from independent sector, if we can get them to come, and we're going to have this up, and I'll send that information. People have asked, how can we use technology and digital media to fundraise during this period of time? We'll have a full webinar on this. Board governance, what's the responsibility of board members during this time, right? And then finally, people have asked me questions in this and as well as emails about managing the endowment. Is this a right time to start an endowment? Stocks are so down, so maybe we should invest early. We don't know, but we'll find an expert that will. We have actually an expert that is. Saturna Capital is partnering with us on this. And all of this is going to be done before Ramadan. So you'll be receiving all of this information for free webinars. Every single webinar is going to be recorded. It's going to be available free of cost, and is going to be there for when you need it. So with that, I've taken 3 minutes over. I'm going to save the chat. So now I have all the chats, and we'll respond to those later on. But I just want to thank everybody for their patience, apologize for any mistakes we made in putting this together. And I just wanted to appreciate really Angela, Meera, and Tayyib. We really appreciate you being part of this, sharing your Saturday with us rather than at homes with your families. And take care. Assalamu alaikum, and may Allah bless you all, and may Allah bless our community. And may Allah bless everybody at this time. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum.